G'day viewers, I'm Adam Stokes. Welcome back to the channel where today we're exploring what we do when we make our millions of dollars in crypto or in other industries and deal with the reality of retirement. I've invited Peter Graeme, a friend of mine, onto the channel who's got a very niche market. It's called Redefining Retirement, is his company, Proprietary Limited, here in Australia. And I want to speak to Peter and invite you to ask questions to Peter about some of the dangers of retiring with or without money, early or later in life. Let's bring him in. Mr. Peter Graeme, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.
Peter, we've been friends for many years, but you've got a very niche industry. Your company is Redefining Retirement, and we've spoken about it before, but certainly in my niche market of crypto, many people are coming into millions. Why does your industry exist?
Well, let me say this. There's not many people in my industry that actually talks about retirement without talking about money. Now, you need money, and that's what we'll also talk about. But I was a financial advisor for 50 years, and I realized when I was doing this that the people who had accumulated money or inherited money, whatever, were not happy in retirement. And it used to worry me to think that here I was helping them accumulate money and invest their money, but they were not happy. And that's when I started to ask the question about retirement. And I realized that at that particular stage, there are two completely different components associated with retirement. The first one is financial. Now, there is no doubt in the world that you need money for retirement. The second component is lifestyle, and that is, how are you going to fill in your time in retirement? Now, strangely enough, the industry in which we work highlights the importance of having plenty of money. They don't really define how much it is, because that's very difficult to define, simply because every single person in retirement has different needs and therefore needs different investments, income, and the like. The other side of retirement, the lifestyle issues, are rarely spoken about. One of the reasons is that most people don't know what they're about. Now, I've worked out that there's about in excess of 75 issues that can be discussed when it comes to lifestyle issues in retirement. Now, add that to money, and you've got a lot of topics to talk about. So, to answer your question, Adam, we are here simply to explain to people what retirement's all about and all the issues that are needed to be understood so that you can have a fabulous retirement.
So when we look at, there's two parts to retirement. First of all, I want to talk about the psychological component of retirement before we go into the financial components. I've always seen that those who retire early without some type of meaning in life, statistically, I learned this years ago, men were actually more inclined to die earlier in retirement. As an example, if you're a career go-getter, you're high up in your position, your company relies on you, the people around you rely upon you, and then you retire, and then suddenly you're in, if you will, stillness or quietness. Statistics of the past suggest that men handle retirement less well than women, but what are you seeing now in the data? What is the biggest mistake, before we get into the financials? What's the biggest mistake people make psychologically when they retire?
Well, I think basically they think it's easy. That, heaven forbid, all you've got to do is get up in the morning and you haven't got anything planned and you just have a great day, don't you? Well, it's not like that, unfortunately. And what I have learned is the harder you work at your retirement, and I'm 81 years of age, the harder you work at it, the easier it is. But if you take it easy, it becomes very difficult indeed. So in general terms, I think that's the big problem with most people who approach retirement. And that is, they take it easy, they don't plan for it, they never think about what they're going to do, and therefore they have a very difficult time.
I'm just going to do another radio check. Craig and Wolf is King give me 5x5. Can I just check the audio out there? I've adjusted something in the background, but we should be okay now. Thanks, Wolf is King and Craig for the 5x5. When we look at also retiring for planning, so I've been listening to this channel, who is another financial advisor. Thank you, Wolf is King. This financial advisor is telling me that many people come to him late in life when they're getting into their 50s or 60s and they say, right, now it's time to get serious about planning for retirement. Are you finding, because I got to admit, in my 20s and 30s, I'm not even thinking about retiring. All I'm thinking about is money. I'm thinking about building my career to get the money to retire, but I'm not thinking anything beyond the actual plan of retirement except for money in itself. So you said it's a lot of work to plan for retirement. When do we start planning for this process?
Well, my suggestion is that people start thinking about retirement quite seriously at about the age of 50 and still working. So the process of working is important when you're thinking about retirement, because it's a completely different exercise between going to work and retiring. Now, retirement started back in the 1880s when Chancellor von Bismarck had a problem, and he was running a company in Germany and the economy was going well, but he had a huge unemployment problem with younger people, and all the older people were happily working. In fact, the people who were working were living way past the average lifetime expectancy at that time. But he needed to overcome the unemployment problem. And so he decided that he would go to the people who were working later in life and saying, I've got a good idea. I will pay you to stop working. Excuse me, you're going to give me money? Well, I like that idea. So they stopped work. Unemployment problem was solved, and all these people were on what we know now to be a pension. Well, unfortunately, they didn't live long because they'd lost their purpose, they'd lost their reason to get up, they lost the social interaction that you get out of work, they lost so much, all the friendships and the discussions with other people about problems and the discipline of going to work. Now, that's going back a long time, but that concept of paying people to stop work is still in existence. And pretty well every country I know is still in existence. And so what happened is that we've developed this culture that people believe that retirement is something that happens on a day, and one day you're working, one day you're not. Now, that's the old form of retirement, the type of retirement that my parents had, and I guess yours too, Adam. And they retired and basically passed away very quickly, simply because they had nothing to do. There was no discipline in their life. And also, getting back into those days when my mum and dad retired, there was nothing to do apart from just fiddle around the house and that type of thing. Different these days, mind you. We've got a lot of things to do, but the problem still exists, and that is there's an expectation that on a certain day, somewhere along the line, you will retire. And the bottom line is that nobody has ever said that you must retire. Nobody. In our society, it's a cultural thing that you will something like retire. Well, you don't have to retire. And those who do don't have to stay retired. And more people are going back to work or starting second businesses or are getting back into the cultural activities that were so common in retirement. And those who still retire, they have all the opportunities in the world these days to travel and to do all the things that they want to do. So it's a little bit different now than it was in the past, but many people are still living in the past and believe they have to retire. Now, it doesn't bother me or anyone else retire, but that's culture that we deal with, and that's the type of thing I'm handling when I help people understand what retirement is all about.
So then I'm wondering, based on what you've said, what do you think is more dangerous? We'll go with Australia first, and then we'll go global. What is more dangerous for an Australian to retire? Is it their finances or their mindset?
Mindset.
Wow.
No doubt. And the simple reason is, and we're not talking about people who've got lots of cryptocurrency or anything like that. We're talking about the average person can receive in Australia a pension which is livable. Now, people who are on the pensions, that's not livable. I have discovered, so many people have discovered that the reason it's not livable is not because of the money or lack of money, it's because of the poor spending habits of those people. The pension is designed to do certain things, and it's designed to provide enough money to live on. It's not there to buy a car and travel and go down and buy lottery tickets or anything like that, and yet that's what everyone does. What I'm saying is there is sufficient money to retire on if that's what we're talking about. If we're talking about all those other things, that's where it all falls apart. And so the mindset where people fail.
Okay, so let's consider this. We've got a new law coming into Australia where the government is going to tax unrealised gains on your pension. For our international viewers there, we call it our superannuation funds. So they're looking at taxing money that you haven't cashed out on in your superannuation fund above $3 million. But of course, that's not indexed. So many people below, I guess, 50 think, well, that's not a big issue because $3 million is a lot of money, that they would think. But I look at it this way, Peter. If I'm going to live to, let's say I live to 90. So I retire at 60 as an example, just throwing numbers out there. I retire at 60. I've got $3 million in my superannuation. I've got $3 million to last me 30 years. And what you touched on there as well, you said the pension was designed, or is designed, primarily not to go on holidays and do lavish things, but to survive in many instances. But all the labour that you do leading up to your pension, to your retirement, you get your own house, you get some savings, you get other funds and 401ks if you're in the United States, you build further on your pension. Are we in danger in Australia of having our pension eroded away by the Australian government's new law?
I'm not too certain that the pension will be eroded away because that's an income. The unrealised capital gains tax is based on assets which are growing and producing income, and that's what's being taxed. So sure, the tax is coming on the income as well, but on the growth factor, that is being taxed at 30%. And so you get a situation where somebody has an asset, keep it very simple, that doubles in 1 year, bang, it's taxed, even though they've still got the asset. And it's completely unclear as to how that is going to be calculated when that asset starts going up and down in value. But I think the most important thing about this tax is that it's some people. For example, as I understand it, our Prime Minister is not affected by it. Judges aren't affected by it. Public servants in other states that have these types of retirement plans are not affected by it. It's people like you and me who have accumulation plans that are being affected by this additional tax. And quite frankly, I believe it is grossly unfair.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we saw the same thing happen with COVID. The vaccines were mandated for most of Australians, but it wasn't mandated for politicians or judges. And it just seems to be a case of rules for thee, but not for me. I'm just getting some feedback from the frontline agents in the field. We're getting a bit of glitching from your end. If you've got any tabs open, could you close them down because we're losing some of your internet connection? We've got just some comments coming in here from the viewers. I remind all the viewers, if you want to ask Peter any questions, I highly recommend you do so. He's a professional where he gets paid for doing this, and on this show you have the opportunity to speak to him and ask questions for free. So going back to our retirement journey. So you said primarily we should start focusing on it around our 50s. That's where those in their 50s will start coming towards you and saying, well, hey, Peter, I've got to start getting serious about this retirement thing. What should I consider? When you said you're a financial advisor in a past life, when people are coming to you, are they primarily coming to you for, if you will, spiritual and psychological guidance or fiscal guidance?
Well, firstly, they come to me for financial guidance. And secondly, when they understand that it's not just about money, but it's also about lifestyle issues, they soon turn around and want to know more about the other issues, because those issues are the ones which concern people the closer they get to retirement.
We have seen lotto winners. I want to go into the psychology of getting a lot of money. So in my line of work, a lot of people are coming into money very quickly, and it's quite dangerous. I speak about on my channel about getting rich very quickly is like giving a young person the keys to a V12 Ferrari that's got, I don't know, 1,000 horsepower, and they haven't quite learnt how to drive yet. So what we see is that some people who get into lotto wins, they end up in a place much worse than when they started. Equally, we've seen in the crypto world, people who have come from a humble background have suddenly made millions, sometimes tens of millions, and in the rare cases, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in crypto in a very short period of time. And then those people end up, ironically, in a worse place than when they started because they can't manage the money. Sticking to the financial side, what's the danger of coming into huge amounts of money very quickly and then suddenly saying, right, I'm retiring and now just becoming an Instagram model and going around the world and sitting on yachts and sipping pina coladas? Why is that dangerous to suddenly be free?
One of the huge problems that people face in retirement, and it doesn't matter whether it's money or lifestyle, but let's stay with money, is they don't have the habits that are necessary to live with money. They don't know how to do it. Now, I've had, five lottery winners in my life as a financial advisor have come to me. Not one of them had any money left when I finally got out of the industry. Because they don't know how to spend it. They have never accumulated the right knowledge to run a life with money. And so they think, oh, well, I need that boat. I've got to have that. Oh, I need a new car. Oh, no, I'll get a bigger car than that. Oh, we've got to move house. That's a good idea. And they go on and on and on and on, spending, and all of a sudden they don't have any money, or they've got money invested in the wrong things, which is not producing any income for them to live on. Now, that's the common way that people live when they have not got the habitual way of living with money. And that happens so often with people who receive a lump sum in retirement. I'm not talking about multi-millions, I'm just talking about small amounts. They think money, whoopee, we'll go and do this, we'll do that, we'll travel, we'll go and do all these things. All of a sudden they haven't got any money. And when they lose a lot of their assets, then they're entitled to get the pension and complain bitterly. But in actual fact, it was their lack of habits that caused the problem.
That's really powerful to think that all five of the lotto winners that came to you, first of all, it's an impressive sample size when it comes to lotto winners, five of them, but all of them walking away in the end with absolutely nothing. That's absolutely tragic. And I talk about a lot on my channel. I say, when you come into the crypto space, instead of getting the 12-bedroom house with 12 bathrooms and a 10-car garage and 5 cars, I talk about the insurance and the maintenance of all of those assets. And what I'm really trying to do on my channel is future-proof my viewers, my community. I want them to future-proof themselves. And a lot of them have been very good in understanding that instead of getting the Lambo when they come into the millions, one of my viewers, Ramsey, which I'll bring in a second, he's got a super chat here. He's a young fella and he's very focused on getting a Toyota Corolla. And I really like that because as a young guy who's just focused on getting a very efficient car that maintains its value or price for many years, I think that's fantastic. I also think about when I was much younger, spending so much money on cars and holidays as opposed to investing. But at the same time, I'm glad I had my adventures of being a young guy traveling around the world and going to different universities. Many of those are opportunities that I won't get in my retirement. But this is a good segue into what Ramsey has asked us here. Thank you for the super chat, Ramsey. He says, this is a question to you, Peter. Ramsey says, what would be the most helpful advice you would give to a 25-year-old regarding retirement? I reckon the preservation age will be extended for me. So what, first of all, if I can ask, what's the retirement age currently? What do you think it will be? And then what would you give 21-year-old Ramsey advice for in planning with his retirement?
Well, the retirement age is whenever you want it to be. There is no set age when you must retire. There are taxation advantages in retiring at a certain stage, and that is from 67 onwards. But you can retire early if you want to. You just don't get those taxation advantages immediately. Or you can do as I'm doing at 81, still working and loving every minute of it, and I couldn't give a damn about the idea of retiring per se. I live the life that I want to live. So as far as I'm concerned, looking at the definition of retirement, I've already got what I want. And yet I'm still working based on what other people might think. But the big problem that a 21-year-old has is they must develop habits of, one, saving regularly, two, investing correctly and building up all that knowledge and the habits, and three, controlling their spending. Now, if they do those three things, then by the time they get to an age, whatever they want to do, retire when, if they want to retire, there'll be plenty of money there. But the idea of having a set retirement age, that doesn't work, never has worked. And in actual fact, you can retire whenever you want to retire.
Just on
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But Craig Patton says there's a set age on accessing your super, though. So I guess you're saying that you can retire whenever you want to, as long as you're financially in a position to do so.
That's right. Yeah, and there are advantages in retiring later and accessing your super later. There's no doubt about that. But you can retire, you can do it any time. But the taxation advantages cut in later on in life. And one of those taxation advantages is accessing your super.
I think about those who have never had the opportunity to retire. So last year, maybe it was a couple of years ago, I was in a workplace and he was about 51-ish. He just stood up at his desk and had a heart attack and literally died in the workplace. And of course, it was a very sad event, but you know, once we get past the morning of it, you start to think of the fiscal part and the retirement part. He worked his whole life and he never actually got to retire. Now, of course, that might be an outlier there, but we're seeing a lot of people not reaching retirement just for not making it. And I often wonder in my own life, it's like, well, the longer I work, the more money I'll have for my retirement and the better my superannuation will be if I'm in those funds. But equally, as we've spoken about before, if we retire before we haven't finished with our mission, like I don't think your mission personally will ever end. I think you've just got it in your blood to work forever. If you look at also Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and even Donald Trump, these are guys who just keep working their entire life. They're just going to work until the end. So I'm in my mind, I'm trying to get this balancing act of, I don't know when I'm going to die. Let's say I die at 66, but I retire at 65, that I've only had 1 year. But then if I've got the mindset that I'm always going to work my entire life, then it doesn't really matter about retiring. It's just doing what you love. But then, of course, you have the game of trying to find what you love. There's a great ad that says, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I can't help to think, Peter, that you're in a position that you've found a job that you love. Therefore, what you're doing, although it's generating income, you're not seeing it as work. And what I see as a friend of you, as an observer of your work, is that, first of all, you've done very financially well in your life. But equally, I can just never see you giving up working because you want to work to generate this money. Now, that's great for someone like you who's in this position of, yes, I've got to keep going, or Charlie Munger, who worked until the day he died, or Warren Buffett, who's pretty much just stepping down from the board, but he's really getting on. And I think Donald Trump will work forever. So we look at these great minds and great people, love or hate them, but they're financially very well off and they love what they're doing and they continue to work. But this is all leading into the question, what about those of us who have been in the past or presently, they're stuck in these crap jobs, something that they don't love, that's degrading their life. It's okay with their money, it's helping their bank account, but it's affecting their emotional state, physical state, and psychological state. Where's the balancing act? What tools do you use to say, right, maybe you should step away now and focus on what life you've got left, as opposed to continuing to work and degrading your standard of living at the cost of your bank account?
I think the idea of stepping away, we'll all think about it at some particular stage. And I would encourage it, provided it's done with the proper advice and with the right attitude in mind. And those people who do that often do better after they retire than beforehand. In fact, I was talking to a chap last Monday down in Melbourne, and he is a chap that reached the top in America and made a fortune. And he came back to Australia, and he now helps people who have been to the top and realized that that's not what they want to do. And so he's helping them to learn about exciting different things, a new way of life, what a sunset is, what the children like, all those types of things. So it's all a matter of choice and whether people make the choice or don't make the choice. Now, most people who are rising up to the top, particularly in high-paid positions, they just don't know how to stop. They don't. In fact, a very good friend of mine rang me and started saying, why am I doing this? Well, 6 months later, he's still doing it, even though we did all the counselling. He just can't get away from the love and the excitement of what he is doing. Now, unfortunately, to just change the subject slightly, but it's on subject, the number one thing in the world, and every person viewing this session tonight, and every person you meet tomorrow, and in fact around the world, we all have one problem, and that one problem is the most important problem in the world. Answer: your next breath. That's the most important thing for all of us. Now, summarize that down, it's called health. We must look after our health, and if we look after our health, then a lot of the things that we're talking about change and change dramatically. So I would encourage people to really concentrate on making certain they are healthy or become healthy or do lots of activity to make certain they are healthy, and not necessarily concentrate on the extra hours at work, the travel, the Zoom calls at 2 a.m. in the morning. It just goes on and on and on. It becomes endless. And they're choices that people have to make. It's up to the individual to decide what type of life they want, and then seek necessary advice and do something about it if they choose to do it.
It's very powerful. Just while I've got you there, I'm just going to give a story. Can you just also check your internet connection? It's still very glitchy at this end. If you've got
I've turned everything off, so I don't know what that could be.
It's always
Bear with me.
live. We could speak all day pre-recorded, but as soon as you go live, that's when it all happens. But the reason, to the viewers out there, I apologize for the sound and glitchiness, but I wanted to go live because I want to get the viewers involved in this. Axel, I've got your question, but I just want to share a quick story that, Peter, you've helped me think of. There was this guy I worked with years ago. He was a nice guy, but he was a junior. Well, hang on. He was old in age, but junior in position in the organization I was working for. And he did not look after his health at all. And he got diabetes type 2. And it was like something out of a horror movie. And I share it with everyone because I regularly talk about health on this channel, where I'm talking about, don't be a land whale. And I say that quite aggressively because it's like, well, hang on, that's a bit rude. And it's like, no. Being morbidly obese is not cool. It's not fashionable. It's not healthy at every size. This stuff will kill you. Failing to go to a gym and look after your health, that stuff, it will lead to your death. And as you just said, the most important thing is your next breath, because without your next breath, it doesn't matter. Anyway, this guy in the workplace that I was working with, really nice guy, but he got diabetes type 2, and he came to work one day and he had his toes removed. Then a few months later, he had his foot removed. Then a few months later, he had his leg removed. Then a few months later, he had his other foot removed. And we had to watch this guy in the workplace from his poor health. And it was very horrifically confronting to watch your workmate literally be cut to pieces by surgeons because the diabetes type 2 was basically taking his body as he was getting worse and worse. But in his health journey, he didn't take any steps to rectify that. And he actually ended up dying in his early 50s. And the whole workplace, of course, went to his funeral. And it was just an absolutely tragic thing because it didn't matter what he was thinking about his retirement or his income. He never made it that far because he didn't look after his health. Now, this segues into sort of what we've been talking about. Axel has said to you, Peter, he said, what are the top 3 things you ask everyone who comes to see you to do or think about before you go further? So a client comes to you, what are the top 3 questions that you're asking them to establish where they are, and perhaps get our viewers to consider what they should be looking at before retiring or considering retiring?
The very first thing that people need to do is to imagine what type of retirement they would like. Now, bear in mind that the people asking the question, the individual, doesn't necessarily know what retirement's all about, but they know enough to ask the correct questions of themselves as to what they want. For example, the biggest health issue in the world is loneliness. And when I'm out talking to seniors, I say, hands up those who volunteered for loneliness. Nil. Nil volunteered to watch 9 hours of film in the day. Nil decided to get heart disease or diabetes or anything else. A lot of these things, when it comes to health or for any aspect of retirement, are all based on what you dreamt about or didn't dream about years ago. So the very first thing we need to do is try and work out what type of retirement you want. What type? That's broadly speaking, what's it to be? Now we go back and we might think of the movie The Bucket List, where these guys were dying in hospital and they decided they'd break out of hospital and go and live their dream, their bucket list. Now, you shouldn't do that when you're dying. You should do that from today, from this very moment onwards, not even when you're retired. It's something you start now. So the first thing is to establish the dream. The second thing, equally important, whatever you do in retirement, do it with people. Now, people are the things that make life worthwhile and happy. Sure, we've got our investments and we've got all the rest of it, but without people, loneliness can set in and other issues, particularly health issues, can start up. So think that you'll always be doing it with people. Now, obviously, there's the first level, which is family. That's very important to know that you've got your family there, and therefore keeping good relationships is really important. But from that point on, you must continue to meet people and make friends. Now, I ask people, how many new friends have you made in the last 5 years? Good friends. I'm still waiting for any answer above 0. People find it extremely difficult to make friends. So another thing to do in this process of being with people is to learn to meet people you don't know and turn them into friends over a long period of time. And you'll meet thousands to get 1 or 2 new friends, thousands. It's not easy to make good friends. But as you become older, those friendships are the things that make retirement so much more enjoyable. And another thing, and I know this from personal experience, but I also know it because of the work that I'm doing in caring for people who are caring for other people, that when you enter a really difficult time of life, like bad health, just use that as an example, you will be abandoned by your friends. And that's the reason you need a large circle of friends, so that at least you've got a few people coming around when times are difficult. Now, that happened to me. I learned from a client, actually, that you are abandoned by your friends. I learned that, and it wasn't until I developed breast cancer that I found exactly that happened. You are abandoned by your friends, not because they want to, they just don't know what to say. They've never learned how to handle this type of difficult period in life. So going back to the second point, it's about people. We've got to learn to spend time with people and to develop friendships. Now, they're two of the most important, and I'll stop there in case there's any other questions.
Look, it's very confronting what you're saying, and we have this change. So, SJ, as you said, people's moral compass has been compromised. I trust code. And Axel has said, thank you for taking the time to do this for us. Most parents don't take this kind of time to educate their children. We do appreciate your time and consideration for our well-being. Thank you, Axel. That comment's
Thank you,
really
Axel.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good guy. John D says, friends here is good enough for me. Wednesday, Sunday extra is the bonus. Thank you, John D. He's talking about this community of this channel. This channel is, I would suggest, very special because we have a very close network here. Everyone's welcome here. I don't care where you're from, what you support, what your religious or sexual background is, or color, and none of that matters. What matters is that we have a place where we can all speak freely and get into more than just charts on the screen. And I've been talking a lot on this channel about making a memory. So when you make a lot of money, instead of just buying the Louis Vuitton man bag, Landfield crap, ensure that you go out there and you make a memory with those you love. And I really like that you said about the bucket list. As opposed to waiting until you're too old or on your deathbed to go out and do all of these things that you should have done, you should do it throughout life. And I actually practiced what I preached the other day. I saw on a Facebook post, my friend who I went to school with, she's a very good actor and singer. And she didn't even tell me about it. And she lives actually closer to you than me. And a post came up saying, oh, watch, I'll say her name, Haley, in this play. And without hesitation, even though it's quite a drive for me and I'm going to have to book a hotel and go see my friend in a different state, I actually bought the ticket immediately and booked a hotel to go up and watch this performance and then drive back the next day. And she was actually quite surprised that I was going to do this. And I said, no, you were a good friend in high school. You were a good friend throughout life. And this is your profession. This is what you do. And I want to see it. And then I also realized that many of the experiences I had when I was younger, I would not be able to do when I'm older. As an example, I lived in Spain for a year and met a very rich, my community knows this, I met a very rich person at university who took me on his yacht with his parents, they were billionaires, around the Spanish and Portuguese coastline. Now that was an experience I could have as an 18-year-old, hanging out with my mate from university in Europe, as opposed to doing it as an 80-year-old. So I put this out, I'm just echoing what you're saying, and it's really helping me have insight to what's going on here. It's important for all of us to make sure that you realize that some of the experiences that you have now are not going to be able to be the experiences that you have when you're older and in retirement. At a minimum, your body may not be able to keep up. But secondarily, there are experiences that you can have with younger people as a younger person, as opposed to being an older person with younger people, which integrates now into this thing about people. So what Steve J has said here, we're going into a low trust society. So the issue that we're facing now is that there's so many scams out there and there's so many people trying to put themselves first and focus on their own well-being and focus on their own gains. And certainly in our world, in the financial and even internet world, for all of us, there's so many internet scams, telecommunication scams, crypto scams, and as a consequence, there's so little trust. Then we expand and we look at Japan, and Japan is, we're just talking about it last night on the show, Japan is in a situation where people are hiring people to be friends with them. Sorry, my cable's just caught up. So these people who are, and it's not even sexual friendships, if you will, so it's not hiring prostitutes. It's literally men and women paying for hugs and paying for friendships. We've got declining populations in nations like Japan and Korea, and in Australia, native populations are declining as well. We've got work from home arrangements where people are working from home. We've got single entrepreneurs that are working in their own space, simply working in front of a computer screen. we've got people like John D, who's basically said the friends here is good enough for me on Wednesday and Sunday. Extra is a bonus. And he's talking about these digital friendships. Then we go into, don't worry, I'm getting to a question with this. I'm just forming a base here. Then we look at these terrible situations where you look at retirement villages where in theory they look like they're really good, where you bring all these people together, they're the same demographic, they're the same age, they're in the same situation, and they're living independently, but also have the access to the village, if you will, of other people to interact with. But then there's cases of people being abused in those aged care facilities. There's also financial abuse where people are being ripped off. Some terrible cases where people think they're getting into an aged care facility that they own, as in buying a villa, but really they're just leasing it. And before they know it, their retirements have run out. I'm bleeding all of this into the question of trust. So trust is what I'm really working on in this channel, building a place where we can all trust each other and question each other in a, if you will, a safe space. But there is no doubt on the societal global stage that trust is eroding. We're losing trust in banks, trust in governments, trust in the media, trust in corporations, trust on whoever calls us up on the phone, trust in the emails. It's all being eroded. How do we break through these barriers and say, right, I'm willing to take a risk to build trust with you and not go through another divorce, another scam, another business that's let me down, another employer that's let me down? How do we embrace what's happening with trust?
Well, thanks for the simple question, I must say. What I would suggest is that it's important that we learn to meet people. That's the very first point. We must learn to meet people. Now, it all started for me in Chicago, and I was at a one-day program with a very prominent psychologist, a good friend of mine. And he said to me at lunchtime, let's go and grab a bite to eat. I know a good diner we can go to. So we arrived at this very extensive, wide expressway. In those days, there was a T-junction. There were lights on this expressway. And we were waiting for the lights so that we could cross over and go to this diner. And I had no idea how many people were there, probably 200 people walking across on this diner, on this pedestrian crossing. And my friend Aaron said, Peter, in a very loud voice, at which point, of course, everybody turned around, Peter, what's your biggest problem? And I thought, what type of question's that? I mean, there we are, standing at a pedestrian crossing. What's your biggest problem? But I knew he was, and he's influenced every person in this group that's watching this. But Aaron said to me, what's your biggest problem? And I said, I'm chronically lonely. Chronically shy. And then he asked me another very good question. He said, do you want to solve the problem? I said, yes. He said, by the time we've walked across that road, you will not have a problem again. Do as I say, and you will not have that problem. And basically, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but basically it boils down to this. Every single person out there, everyone, knows how to answer a question. Very few people know how to ask a question. And the skill that he taught me was how to ask appropriate questions. None of this, hello, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? None of that. Absolute questions which do not have a single answer. They are open questions. And if you ask open questions of people, they will usually answer them. And the more you talk to people about in open questions, and more often you talk to people, the closer people will come to you. Because obviously you're showing that you like them or trust them at that stage, and you can build that up over a period of time. Now, trust is a real challenge in our society. I've lost millions from people who have dudded me, people that I trusted. But You've got to get up and move on from that point. It's no use grizzling about it or complaining. But it's because we perhaps missed something. And that's learning those skills of understanding friendships is the key to long friendships, which we have where trust is involved. And as I get older, I find more and more that the friendships I have are built on trust, and they're very, very strong indeed. So I would just encourage everyone to learn how to meet people by asking open-ended questions. Any question with a yes and no answer, forget it. Just forget it. Use open-ended questions, and you will find that people start to warm to you, and you can then warm to them. And over a period of time, you will develop friends. Now, friends are not all friends. They're not all the same. There are basically 5 types of friends. Now, and I don't want everyone to do this every week or every month, or in fact, do it once. And that is to make a list of your friends. Sit down and make a list of friends, A to Z, every single one of them. And then slowly go through that list and say, are they must friends? That's people you can't do without, your best friends. Are they trust friends? People that you trust. Now, you can have a trust and a must friend as one person. There's no doubt about that. But must and trust friends are the first 2. The next group of friends are just friends. That's must, trust, and just friends. And the last group of friends are, or the second last group of friends are rust friends. And if people who are best friends, perhaps you've called it off, they've called it off, they've died, they've moved, they've whatever the case may be. They're just no longer there.
We just lost those last 2. Can you set? Sorry to interrupt you. I got must friends, just friends. Sorry, must friends, trust friends, and just friends. What were the last 2? My apologies.
No, the last one is a rust friend. And they're people who were friends of whatever reason, no longer friends. Now, that's 4 of them. But the 5th one is the most important group of all, and that is the emerging friends. And these are people that you meet once or twice, as you and I did years ago, Adam. We met and we both thought, yeah, this is, and you build it up over a long period of time into some form of must or trust friend, preferably a combination. The chances of building up a friendship like that is low, but we've got to work on it. We've got to at least meet the people so that we can build up that association with them and decide whether it's going places or not. Now, in my work, I ask people, how many really good friends have they got? And I am staggered at the number of people who say, oh, 1, maybe? I don't know. I don't really know. Oh, yeah, I guess 1. Like, what? You're going to enter a period called retirement for the next 30 years, and you have 1 friend that you know and that you can... That's unnecessary. So the key is to build up as many friends as you can over a period of time, not forcefully, naturally. Build them up over a period of time. And by doing that, you will find that when you enter into retirement of whatever it might be for you, it will be better, because doing retirement with friends and people you know is better than trying to do it on your own.
Powerful stuff. I knew when preparing for this conversation, I'm not even going to call it an interview. I knew when preparing for this that we're going to go down some deep rabbit holes here. And just when you're talking about starting conversations with people, I just got to toot your horn on the global stage here. Whenever we go out for coffee, or we used to have breakfast together in cafes, everyone out there, Peter has an exceptional ability to create conversation with anyone and everyone. He has this warm aura, and as you can probably tell, when he's not glitching out with the internet connection, he's got a perfect voice for radio, and people are just drawn to him. So I was very surprised to hear that in fact you were shy in the past. I just can't picture that with you. I also respect your ability to commit to friendships and put in the effort to maintain these friendships. And I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, actually, it's all coincidental, that there was this a TED talk where a lady was talking about how to engage with people and some of the questions as she was expanding on what you were saying beyond, how are you? Good. How was your day? Good. What are you up to today? Nothing. She went a little bit deeper and said, get people emotionally involved in the conversation. Now, this isn't a skill that I have, but it's just something I observed in this TED talk. She was saying, when you meet someone, say, oh, what's the most exciting thing that you've done last year, over the year? And then she explains in psychology, when people, they separate themselves from where they are right now and even the conversation, and they go deep into this part of their brain where something exciting happened to them, and they relive that moment and share it with you, and they get this warm vibe, if you will, of talking to you and sharing this experience with you. One of the things I do as a tool is I always try to learn from people whenever I meet them. I figure out what they're into, what their profession is, and I just start talking about that profession and ask for guidance on it and how to expand on whatever they do. And I find that is a bit of a tool to also get some engagement. Just to close that point off, in your experience, what are some really powerful open-ended questions that you use as a tool for building relationships with those that you've just met?
Oh, they're endless. But look, even with the local barista, I always talk to the local barista. I talk to the person who owns the facility, coffee shop, the service station, the grocery store. It doesn't matter. We need to talk to as many people as we possibly can to help build up the chances of making them into must or trust friends. Now, when I meet a little young lady or a guy making a coffee, I just ask them, is this your only job, or do you have other forms of interest? And invariably they say, oh no, this is my second or third job. And then you say, what else are you doing that has got you doing this? In other words, whatever you are doing is not doing enough, and so you have to do this as well. And away they go. And it's usually a university course or whatever the case may be. And suddenly they become really interested in the fact that you ask the questions. Now, I walk a lot. I do my 8 to 10 kilometres a day walking. And I've noticed that the best people to talk to and to practice on are people who are walking dogs. Now, those dogs and people are coming towards me. I never look at the owner. I always look at the dog, and I say to every dog, doesn't matter whether they're a Chihuahua or I don't mind, doesn't matter what size dog they are. I say, "G'day, killer, how are you?" And the dog knows precisely what you're talking about. You don't need to explain that to a dog. They know what's going on. Then you start talking to the owner of the dog, and once a person with a dog knows that you like their dog, they'll talk forever. I also talk to when I see an Italian in the front yard. They're older Italian men are fairly easy to see, and I'll talk to them and say, "Well, what's your vegetable garden like out the back?" Well, they just blossom. They just change instantly. And so as I walk, I now have hundreds and hundreds of people in the district who know me simply because I go and talk to them. Doesn't matter whether they've got roses, doesn't matter whether they own a business, doesn't matter what they do, I always talk to them. And I would encourage everyone to start practicing at that level. Don't start practicing with the CEO of some corporation. Start practicing down low and building up over a period of time. And you will find it easier and easier and easier as you go along to talk.
Axel's made a comment here. He says, in my opinion, low trust societies are due largely to globalization. The more mixed cultures are, the less they have in common, the less they tend to build strong relationships and communities with. Allow me to expand on that before I get your opinion on it. So I've lived in 5 countries. And when I was growing up in Australia, of course, I was always told multiculturalism is the way to go because diversity is key. And it's like, okay, that sounds great. I believe certainly in diversity of conversation. But then and diversity of thought and diversity of discussion and lots of diversity, biodiversity and so forth. But my personal life experience is the best countries I've lived in are actually monocultured countries. So, for example, the most fun I'd probably had was in Korea, which was very monoculture, if that's such a word, as opposed to multicultural. And even though I was the outsider and couldn't speak the language perfectly and looked very differently to everyone around me, it was fantastic. Then I also look at perhaps when I was in Japan, a very much a monoculture, these things are shifting. There seemed to be high trust in those societies. So you can see one of the highest trust societies in the world is Japan, which is coincidentally a very monocultural as well. What we've created here on this channel is we are a very diverse community on this channel. And it's almost like we've created our own culture where we all have come into this channel to speak about the culture of what money is. And this is why I've brought you on here to really talk about, okay, we're all working for this thing called money, and then we get to retire. But then if we don't retire properly, the money means nothing and we're in big trouble. So it's leading me into how you're making these friends. In your opinion, is it irrespective of what they're into, and you just play the game, as you mentioned, with the garden, what are you growing in your vegetable garden? Or are people drawn to each other when they've got something in common? Can there be true friendships when people are completely polar opposite? Or do we strive to have something in common, whether it's at a basic level, language, gender, religion, spiritual beliefs? Is it perhaps our focus on crypto or the footy team or baseball? Or what do we need as the layer one, the underlying value to bring us together to have a friendship?
Well, I think you're right, and that is that people that have commonality, be it a football team or in the monetary side of life or age or anything like that, they find it a lot easier to talk with that friendship that they're building up. There is no question about that. And I'm reading a book at the moment, I can't quite think of the name of it, where it talks about that they've worked out that people, believe it or not, with the same date of birth, the same month or day of birth, they can get on well together simply because they see there's some form of link and commonality. And so it's best to work with people where you do have commonality. So it'd be no use for me, for example, going and talking to a football code that I didn't know much about, or a sport of which I knew little about, or I don't want to get involved in a knitting group, and I don't want to get involved in so many different aspects of life. But when you do get involved in them, because you're involved, you will get that link, and it will be a lot stronger link as well. And so I'm talking to people who own dogs. It shows that I like dogs, and whether or not the owner of the dog likes dogs, and so it goes from there. And I have learned over a period of time that if you concentrate on something that they like, obviously like, then it's a lot easier to build the friendships up.
When I want to go to a real life example. So in your journey in being a retirement coach or advisor, actually, let's merge the two stories. So you've been a financial advisor and a retirement coach, and sometimes they overlap. What's the most successful retirement you've seen? And even if it overlaps with financial, what is the best success you've seen in your experience? What was it, because they were focused on family, focused on career, focused on both? What is the underlying principles of a successful retirement based on what you've actually seen?
There's no question about that, and that is anyone who lives with a purpose is much happier than the person who doesn't. Now, it doesn't matter what your purpose is. Your purpose can be, as we've talked about, gardening, or it can be helping charity, or it can be working with people who are underprivileged, or it can be being a close family man, or being a very much a good grandparent. Anything with a purpose, in other words, a passion to live a certain way of life, they are the people, beyond any realm of a doubt, that are the happiest. People who've got a passion in life are the people who are the happiest. And they certainly have a much healthier life as a result of it as well, because you can't do all the horrible things if you're passionate about something. It's very difficult. Now, I'm not talking about being passionate about alcohol or smoking or anything like that. I'm talking about contributing to society in some way. And if you do that, you will find that people are happier in everything that they do. And not only that, but they develop a reputation out there where people are sort of amazed that they're able to do that. But everyone can do it. And that's really the question. So passion is the answer.
So when we look at passion and purpose, the issue I have when mentoring younger people, well, actually, they don't even have to be young. They can be in their 40s and say, I still don't know what I want to do with my life. So what do we do if you've gone through your whole life? You didn't know what you wanted to do as a career. You weren't really sure about making a family. You get to retirement and you still haven't found your purpose. Skynet has said here, purpose is upgradable, forkable, ever evolving. All you need is curiosity.
Absolutely
If you don't
right.
have, yeah, if you don't have purpose, curiosity is enough.
Absolutely right. Oh, that's the start, yes.
Powerful. Now, well done, Skynet, because you've got consensus there from a great thinker. So you know, Skynet is a great thinker in this community, as are many people in this community. Down Under Drover says, sadly, AU or Australia is becoming a low trust society with new populace. Have you ever thought about living overseas?
Me?
Yeah, because a lot of people are exiting Australia. I'm just about to release a video. I've already made it. My team's editing it now. More and more people are exiting. Is there? You've been in Australia longer than me. You've been alive longer than me. Is Australia becoming better or worse?
I think it's becoming worse overall. I'd have to say that. But I'd also say that most other countries are as well. And the ones that I've travelled to, I've been to 56 different countries, and I've looked around and I've talked to people over a period of time. Not in depth, of course, can't do that. I've been there for a long time. But I listen to me and my friends I talk to regularly on Zoom calls and phone calls overseas, and they're just as unhappy. And so I wonder if people are leaving, where are they going? And are they hoping they'll find something that doesn't exist? That's up to them to work that out. But no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't leave Australia. I would make certain that my life was such that I am particularly happy, that my spouse is happy, my children are happy, and the like. And that would be certainly a very satisfying way of filling in time for me.
Powerful stuff, because I think of this saying that when people are fleeing their country, no matter where they go, there you are. As in, you say, right, everything's too hectic here. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go somewhere else. And you rock up somewhere else, and it's like, oh, damn, I'm still here. It's still me. So whatever the issue is, you've still got these underlying, I don't know, challenges in your mind or perceptions or rackets, if you will, where you've got this perception or anger or hate or frustration or pain or challenge in your life. And even if you flee your country, you're still dealing with that elsewhere. But there's a huge industry around going to where you're treated best. I had a guy on the channel called Andrew Henderson, and his whole profession is about basically taking first world nationals and issuing second passports to them to go live where they're treated best. And that goes down to where their money is treated best, where their political freedom is treated best, where their ability to associate is treated best. And that is a whole industry in itself. And what's so ironic to me, Peter, is that you can see so many, there's like this big shift around the world at the moment. So many second and third world nationals are striving to come to the first world nations like Australia and America and England and New Zealand and Canada and so forth. And equally, at the same time, you've got this mass exodus of first world nationals who have a lot of money, and they're fleeing the first world to go to developing and third worlds where they're treated better. And I just see on the macro this massive shift. Of course, it's not happening in one big wave, but it's absolutely an industry now where you're seeing people moving amongst the world and becoming more mobile, becoming more multicultural as one nation. When it comes to as in retirement, I've noticed that some people are retiring, as an example, to Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, some other Asian countries, where they're trying to stretch their retirement further. They're trying to achieve a higher quality of life financially. In your experience, have you had many people leave Australia, go to Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, anywhere, and achieve a higher quality of life by achieving lower expenses in their life?
Well, they attempt to do that, and there's no doubt that that can happen. A lot of people, perhaps in Melbourne, go to live in Port Macquarie, or people in Sydney on live in Cairns, or whatever the case may be. It's the same principle applies, where people are going because they dream and imagine that it's going to be better than where they are. Now, that's a pretty broad statement and probably not that precise, but you get the idea that people are often going to a dream, and it works for a while. There's no doubt about that. It works for a while. But what we do know is that as you get older, and I mentioned it earlier on, the big issue is your friendships. And you can go to a place such as Malaysia or wherever you like. You have to create friends. And those friends are hard to make. Just as they are now, when you've got every opportunity to do it in your own country, it's going to be even more difficult when you're overseas or in another place that you know nothing about. So typically what happens in those instances, it's fine while they're both alive, if they're married, or in a relationship of some description. When one person leaves, maybe because of a death or because of an illness or because of a breakup of the relationship, the other person is left there on their own. And that is where the trouble starts, because suddenly they find that they're not as happy as they thought they would be or were when the other person was around. And so they decide to come back. And they come back because they remember their friends, they remember what they had, and they think, yes, I'll go back into that. That'd be better than living in X without any relationships or friendships of any depth. So they come back. When they get back, they can't afford the real estate. They can't afford to get back into their circle of friends because their circle of friends have abandoned them. We know that happens. For example, if you move more than 200 kilometres from your place of upbringing or where you had most of your friends, within 2 years, very few people will come and visit you. You will not visit them. You start going to another country, it's even more bizarre. And so what happens is that people go away with a dream, and the dream can be fantastic for a short time, but in the long run, they tend to want to come back to what they know and where their friends are and or family. And so they come back, and that's when it is really disappointing for a lot of people.
That's powerful and in many ways scary. I can relate to what you're saying. So I lived in Spain for a year. I went to university there. I lived in America for a year. I lived in Korea for nearly 2 years. And many people asking me now on the channel, Adam, have you thought about leaving Australia? Now, my biggest expense in my life is my government by far. They're more expensive than anything. But some people say, well, why don't you leave? And I think the best thing I did in my youth was live in these other countries. And I can really relate to what you're saying. Certainly, one part that you perhaps didn't touch on there, but I'll expand on, is discrimination. So there's a radical leftist belief that white people can't experience discrimination. Now, this is coming from people who have never lived in another country and don't know what discrimination is. I can certainly remember when I lived in Korea, experiencing multiple levels of discrimination because of the way I looked. As an example, I was working for the Korean government and I wanted to get a promotion, and the government said, you can't be promoted. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because you're white. And, just blatantly straight out said, you will never be promoted in this organization because of the color of your skin. And I thought, well, at least they're honest about it. I can remember having Korean girlfriends in Korea and being on the subway, just holding my Korean girlfriend's hand and being berated by old racist men who were basically berating me and her for having interracial relationships. When I lived in Spain, I can remember walking through Barcelona with my University of Barcelona folder and having locals abuse me for taking one of their positions in university. And I can also remember, like, I played volleyball in Korea and I injured my knee and I had to go to the doctor. And it was just a knee injury, but the inability to communicate with the doctor was a real pain in the backside. Now, I know there's a lot of English everywhere, but it's not just going to a doctor. It's, I don't know, getting a mobile phone plan or posting something somewhere, just basic things that we do every day. Language does come actually into it, and it's a real barrier and it's a real pain in the backside. And then I started to look, as I get older, every Friday night I swim there's a lot of pools where I live, and I've got a pool in my backyard, as you know, but I go to this one pool every Friday night. And one of the beautiful things that I really appreciate, it's a simple thing. It cost me $6 to get into this pool. And I have an 8-lane, 50-meter Olympic swimming pool to myself. And it's just because there's not many people there. Not many people turn up. There may be one person in the baby pool because it's a bit warmer and they're doing some other exercises, but even that's a rare occurrence. And to have that entire area to myself, just to reset with no talking, because I do that pretty much for a living, no interaction with digital assets or digital communication devices such as computers or mobile phones or even the radio in the car. And it's just one opportunity to unwind. I relate to Korea or Spain. It was just always so full on and so busy. And when I lived in America, at first I'm like, hey, this guy's got an accent. It's so exciting. But then you were always the show and tell guy that had this accent. So I think there's a lot of power in retiring where you were brought up. And I wouldn't have never said that years ago, but I really get it now. I've had the opportunity to go out and live in many parts of the world, go to many different countries, do many different things. But it's like the old saying, there's no place like home. And I can really relate to that. And I think you've helped me make that distinction. Jump for Joy says, I've moved countries 17 years ago. My twin brother can't even visit me. Marco says, when I retire, I am day and night building horse racing models. And with those skills, I hope to venture into building market models for crypto especially. I love it. Peg's Place says, even visiting family is hard sometimes, 3 different states. Marco says, you definitely need some passions or some interest. Otherwise, you are retiring into empty ground where you need then to search out your interests. When it comes to, if you will, finding a place to die. So we go into very deep places here. So ultimately, we're all going to die. When people talk about the actual, if you will, act of dying, so you've lived, you've learnt, you've built your friendships, you've got your money, you've had your adventures, you've ticked off your bucket list before there even needed to be a bucket list. It now comes to the time of dying. In your experience, when it comes to death, where should we die? Are we doing it just naturally in bed? Are we doing it, like some people say, just do something crazy, like he died doing what he loved, as in like being a race car driver or a pilot or something like that? Is it in a retirement village? Is it in palliative care, because then you don't have the burden on your family where you're dying in the home? When it comes to death, is there an appropriate place or way of doing it that is not just about you, but those that you love around you?
Well, most people, from the research I've done, would prefer to die at home. That's difficult to do. And the worst place to put out is in a hospital or in a palliative care unit where nobody cares. Their role is to keep you alive until they can't. Whereas at home, you've got a chance of being with your loved ones. Now, one of the things that I'm learning at the moment is how to care for carers. And so it's the carer that has got the problem often when a person is dying. Person dying, well, they're dying. But the carer doesn't want them to die and has to look after them while they're dying. And I remember when I got to the stage when I had stage 4 melanoma and I was given 6 days to live. And I know what it is like to get to that stage where you're about to die. And I also know what it's like to look at my spouse at the time, Bev, as she's still my spouse now, and see how the heartache that was in her eyes and in her mind as she was watching me fade away. Now, that didn't happen for anyone that's out there. That didn't happen. I didn't die. But it was a good example of what happens. People want to die at home and they would like their family to be with them. Well, unfortunately, they don't ask the family. And for the family, it is extremely difficult. And we live in a society here where the subject of death is not talked about enough. And it is very difficult for people to get to a point of death because not only do they not understand it or have not spoken about it, but their supporters, their carers haven't done it either. Now, having been there, I know that that's the case. But now I'm teaching this to people and how important it is to talk about this subject to your family and with the people you love. Now, one of the things that people are worried about when it comes to death is, of course, the financial affairs. Also, are they well organised or not? And if so, how well organised are they? And we live in a society where this is just not discussed enough. People just let it be assumed that they've got a will, that they've got a power of attorney, that they've got their assets in the right name and in the right area and it's all under control and they know where the paperwork is and the like. This is an assumption on both sides of the fence. The beneficiaries or the family, they think it's all been done, or at least cross their fingers and hope so. And the person who is dying, they don't care much because they're dying. And they would just say, well, oh, they'll work it out. And it's a disaster most times. For example, I have a document which I update every week, and it's my final letter. It's the letter that I have written to my children, explaining to them how I feel about them. Now, I tell them all the time what I feel, but it's the last thing they will see when I die. The last memory on me has any real meaning. Give them the money, yeah, that's one thing. But it's the memories that they want to hang on to. And so I have a final letter, and I'm happy to share that with not the details, but how I do it, with anyone who decides to contact me. But having a final letter there where I know everything's in order. I know that on that list, Adam's name is on the list, not because I'm going to give any money, but because I want my son, the executor, to call Adam to say, got to tell you, mate, but Dad's died. Now, I've got that with all my friends and everyone I know in business who has meaning in my life. So having a final letter makes it easier for the beneficiaries and the family. It's uncommon to do that. Most people just might, have a little card or a letter that they've written to their children or their spouse or their best friends. But very few people have done anything seriously about sorting the whole matter out. And I would encourage everybody to get into the habit of talking about death. Death is going to happen to every one of us. Now, for most of us, we're not going to experience sudden death syndrome. We're not going to die like that. It's not going to happen for most of us. And so we do have time to plan so that it's easier for the people we leave behind. And if we don't do that, guess what? We've left a memory. It's a memory you don't want to have. And that is how disorganized dad or mum or whoever it is were, how they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whoever's listening to this, might I suggest that you really sit down and get this part of your life serious. Fix it up so that you do not leave behind a memory which is horrible. Leave a memory worth having.
That's brilliant, Peter, particularly as we wrap it up here, I say to my private clients, because we're dealing in my space with the money that you can take to the grave. So in my world of crypto, you can actually take this money to the grave because it's not held in a bank, it's not held by a third party unless it's on an exchange. And if you die and you haven't spoken to people about, this is the assets that I've got, you take it to the grave with you. And I make no apology for talking about this with my viewers because they've worked so hard to build their wealth in crypto. And I've made it very clear, particularly in my private consultation, I say, right, have you got a wife? Have you got a husband? Have you got a kids? Do they understand how to access this crypto? Do they understand that if you go tomorrow, all the sacrifice, all the work you've done, do they understand how they're going to get to it? There's some serious commitment from you for updating a letter every week, and Skynet has said make a video, and I thought that was also very powerful by sitting in front of a camera and talking about, I don't know, whatever you want to get off your chest or share with your loved ones after your passing, whether it be sudden or slowly. The other thing I say, Peter, is that in death, when someone dies suddenly, there's no suffering for that person per se. So, I don't know, you're walking along, get hit by a bus and bang, it's over. And there's no suffering for the person, but there's no opportunity for closure. But then when you're in a situation on the other, so death will always suck. But on the other hand, if someone who's dying slowly, they've got cancer, they've got some type of condition, they've been hit by a bus but didn't die, but they're barely on life support, there's an opportunity to get closure. And I always say that this to anyone who's close to me who's got someone who's dying in their life. I always say this one sentence, and you can probably relate to it from where we actually met. I say, make sure you're complete with them. Make sure you are complete with them. Make sure there's no gaps. Make sure you've basically gone through everything that you need to. And I certainly remember losing people in my life and sitting in their deathbed and saying, are we complete? Have we forgotten anything? And we can look at each other eye to eye and say, no, we're good. We've got this sorted. And that's probably the most powerful life advice at my age I can give to anyone. Make sure you're complete with everyone. And when we go to finances, make sure, of course, with crypto, you've got that all sorted. And as you've mentioned with the will, it's not just about your retirement. It's about preparing for where we're all going to end up one way or another. Peter, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I knew it would go deep. We've gone through some of the main points of planning for retirement. Make sure at least by the time you're 50, you're really on a serious path to planning for your retirement. You've mentioned that the biggest danger is not having a purpose or a passion. Make sure you've got a purpose or a passion. You've mentioned also that the most important thing as well is making sure that you have friends. So I think for all of us, we take away that we've got to work on not just maintaining friendships, but building new friendships. That can be quite dangerous. We've spoken about that if you plan to retire overseas, it could be pretty flashy in the first few years, but then it can get a little bit tiresome. And if you leave it too late and you come back to a village that you once grew up in, per se, that village may have forgotten you or moved on. So these are all things to consider. And I wanted to bring you on tonight, first of all, to promote the good work you do, to share our friendship on the channel, and also explain to everyone that you've only got one chance at this life thing. And many of us are focused on making all the money, but if you don't make those experiences, if you don't make those memories, if you don't sort stuff out, it's all for nothing. Peter, if people want to learn more from you, where would they go? How do they find you?
The easiest way for people to contact me is through LinkedIn. Just look up Peter Graeme, Retirement, Sydney, and you'll me. And in there, under the contact details, my telephone number and my contact details. By all means, please contact me. And I have no idea whether there's 3,000 or 5,000 people. I don't know. But I'm making this offer that if you would like me to answer any questions, by all means, send a message, go into Calendly and make a time to talk to me, whatever you like. I'd be very happy to help you.
I've also left a link to your Calendly in the description below, so if people want to make an appointment. I should actually ask, because we're very transparent on this channel, how much does it cost to work with you?
Well, it very much depends on where we're at. For example, if it's coaching before retirement, then I usually have an hourly rate, and I have a basic 10-week program that's an hour plus per week for 10 weeks, where I cover off the key issues and give people the necessary information to allow them to at least create where they're going. And then we clarify later on. If it's in retirement, then it's a completely different structure. because people in retirement think they know a lot, and some do, most don't, and it's a difficult topic to think about. But pre-retirement, that's 50 plus and still working, they're the people I really do enjoy working with and would be happy to help people out. But the fees are usually about $200, $400 an hour, depending on the work that is actually decided.
I've got nothing but positive comments from the viewers out there. Lauren says, great chat. Marco says, thank you so much, gentlemen. Axel is saying thanks, as is Clintron's, Peg's Place, and Ramsey, Skynet. So many great people in this community. I do apologize to everyone for the poor audio on my behalf when I first started, and I apologize for Peter's internet connection. But again, this is what happens when you go live. Everything works perfectly, and the second you press live, it all falls to pieces. But it makes the show more natural, and I have a feeling that we're going to bring you back on the channel. Peter, Graeme, thank you so much for your time tonight. For everyone out there, please leave your likes below, likes and comments and shares as well. Any last words to you, my friend, before we sign off?
No, I've appreciated the time, and I really enjoy talking about this topic. And to me, it's not work. It's just a great way of filling in time. And I love doing it. So I'd be very, very happy to help people.
Peter Graeme from Redefining Retirement, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.